Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
Looking for makeup that's good for people and the planet? Say's range of award-winning products are both high performance and easy to use. Like their Glowy Super Gel, the ultimate effortless, no makeup glowing product. Available in 3 universal shades, it is a multi-use illuminator that hydrates and brightens skin for a fresh, dewy look. When applied, the skin immediately feels refreshed and looks lit from within without chunky glitter or shimmer. Shop Say Glowy Super Gel now at Sephora.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits, including personal shoutouts, early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. I've often said, mysterious disappearances are among the scariest bits of unexplained phenomena. Though not paranormal or supernatural, there is something deeply unsettling about a real-life, flesh-and-blood person simply vanishing into thin air without a trace. Especially nowadays, with 24/7, 365 internet access, social media, and cell phones. That a person can simply be here one minute and gone the next genuinely scares me. Maybe the only thing scarier than disappearing without a trace is reappearing without an explanation. It's difficult to wrap my mind around the possibility that a person can go missing for several days without anyone seeing or hearing anything. Then, just as mysteriously, show back up with more questions than answers. Nearly 50 years ago, in November 1975, Travis Walton went missing while driving down a wooded road. The friends that were with him filed a missing persons report. No one saw or heard from Travis. 6 days later, Travis's sister received a late-night phone call from Travis. Over the next few days, and in the nearly 50 years since, Travis has told a harrowing and disturbing story about his whereabouts during that week. In this episode of The Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the distressing and scary story of Travis Walton. Where was he for those 5 days in November 1975? Was he abducted by aliens, as he claimed? Or did his disappearance have a more rational explanation? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. In late 1975, 22-year-old Travis Walton was working on a 7-person logging crew in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, approximately 2 hours east of Phoenix, Arizona, and just west of the New Mexico border. The crew was run by 28-year-old Michael Rogers, who'd recently secured a government contract to thin out small trees in that area. The job was daunting. Nearly 1,300 acres of land, to be completed by August 1975. Recognizing they could not complete the job in the allotted time frame, Michael requested and received an extension until November 10th, 1975. On October 16th, 1975, just 3 weeks before the deadline, an inspector for the Forestry Service visited the worksite and determined it was impossible for the work to be completed in time. The penalties for missing the deadline were steep: a $2,500 fine and, quote, a disqualification from bidding on future Forestry Service contracts, end quote. A few days after the site visit, Michael Rogers wrote a brief letter to the Forestry Service officer stating, quote, I cannot honestly say whether or not we will finish on time. However, we are working every day with as much manpower as I can hire. I will not stop work until the job is finished or until I am asked to stop. I have had considerable trouble keeping a full crew on the job. The area is very thick, and the guys have poor morale because of this. We will keep working and trying hard, end quote. This context is important because it will come back into play later in the episode. On the evening of November 5th, 1975, after a long day at work, Travis Walton, along with 5 co-workers, Ken Peterson, Alan Dallas, Steve Pierce, John Goulet, and Dwayne Smith, were in a truck traveling home when they noticed a bright glow coming from between the trees. They kept an eye on it as they continued driving, and within a few minutes, drew close enough to realize the light was coming from a sort of aircraft. Except this aircraft was unlike anything any of the men had ever seen. Travis, enthralled by the craft and the light, jumped out of the truck and ran towards the unidentified flying object. The 5 other men, too afraid to accompany Travis, pleaded with him to get back in the truck. The UFO hovered silently in the air, and with each step, Travis Walton came closer and closer and closer. Suddenly, a brilliant flashing bluish-green light shot down at him from the bottom of the spacecraft, sending him flying backwards. The bright flash lit up the night sky and the surrounding forest, making it seem as if it were daylight for a few seconds. One article stated, quote, the witnesses have compared the beam of a bolt of lightning and a long blue flame. Travis never saw the beam, end quote. Filled with fear, the 5 men floored it in the other direction, leaving Travis to fend for himself. 15 minutes later, they returned to the location to help Travis. Except the spacecraft and the light were gone. And so was Travis Walton. After searching the immediate area and finding no sign of Travis, the 5 men drove into town and reached out to local law enforcement. They shared a wild story. They'd witnessed a spacecraft flying overhead. Travis stepped out of the truck to chase it, and when he'd gotten close, was blasted with a flash of light. And then he was abducted. An extensive and thorough search ensued, with many of those searching believing Travis had simply gotten lost in the dense forest. By 1:30 a.m., logging crew chief Mike Rogers and Navajo County Deputy Sheriff Kenneth Copeland went to Travis's mother's home and informed her that Travis had disappeared. Her reaction was peculiar. She was calm and didn't appear surprised by the news. It was almost as if she expected this to happen. In fact, Travis's sister also took the news very calmly, which was disconcerting to everyone else. Hours turned into days, and Travis was nowhere to be found. Something interesting. Each of the men witnessed the spacecraft overhead and the beam of light hitting Travis and throwing him backwards. But because they'd rushed out of the area, they didn't actually see Travis's abduction. They assumed this because when they returned to the area 15 minutes later, Travis was gone. The search for Travis was extensive, on land and in air. On November 7th, close to 50 people searched the area, but came up empty. On November 8th, another search was conducted, this time with a helicopter. Still, there was no sign of Travis Walton. Sometime that day, Dwayne Walton, Travis's older brother, along with crew chief Mike Rogers, recorded an interview that offered an interesting perspective. We will explore this in a few minutes. On November 9th, the search for Travis Walton was stopped, as his mother requested it come to an end. By now, 4 days had passed with extensive searches, covering a massive area of the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, and Travis was nowhere to be found. After search attempts proved futile, Travis's co-workers were accused of murdering him and were interrogated and subjected to a polygraph test to determine the truthfulness of their statements. For their part, the men not only denied harming Travis, but they also all held firm to their story that Travis had been abducted by a UFO. Something interesting. Polygraph examiner C.E. Gilson determined 5 out of the 6 men, quote, were being truthful, end quote. But Alan Dallas's results were inconclusive. One article stated, quote, these polygraph examinations proved that these 5 men did see some object they believed to be a UFO, and that Travis Walton was not injured or murdered by any of these men on that Wednesday. If the UFO was fake, 5 of these men had no prior knowledge of it, end quote. Just after midnight on November 10th, nearly a week after disappearing, Travis's brother-in-law, Grant Neff, received a phone call from Travis Walton. Neff jumped in his vehicle, picked up Dwayne, and traveled to pick up Travis. A telephone operator recognized the name of the caller who wanted to be connected to the Neffs and alerted the local sheriff, who sent a patrol unit to the home. Upon returning, Travis was only able to recall a few hours of the 5 total days he spent missing. The rest was simply gone. He reported waking up in a room, quote, with 3 short creatures that he fought with until a human-like creature led him to another room and placed a mask over his face, end quote. His only other memory was waking up at the gas station and the spacecraft departing overhead. After picking up Travis, Dwayne Walton reached out to a UFO researcher who connected him to a hypnotherapist, Dr. Lester Stewart, who was tasked with hypnotizing Travis to gain access to repressed memories. But when Dr. Stewart met with Travis, he determined he was unfit for hypnotic regression and recommended he be seen by a physician. Dr. Stewart made some interesting observations during his initial examination of Travis. Observations we'll explore a bit later. The story of Travis's disappearance and reappearance spread like wildfire, with various press agencies interested in telling his story. On November 14, 1975, Travis was scheduled to take a polygraph test with the local police. However, he skipped it. That day, the White Mountain Independent ran a front-page story with the headline, "Kidnapped into Spacecraft." Soon enough, news outlets from around the world were seeking an interview with the man who'd been abducted by aliens and returned a few days later. Eventually, Travis agreed to tell his story to the National Enquirer. In December 1975, they ran a story titled, "Arizona Man Taken by a Flying Saucer." Something interesting. Travis refused a polygraph exam conducted by the police and refused to have his interviews recorded. However, he agreed to be hypnotized by a, quote, "doctor associated with a UFO group," end quote. The next day, November 15, 1975, he took a polygraph administered by, quote, "a UFO group and the Enquirer," end quote. Something even more interesting. It was determined that Travis was deceptive during the polygraph exam and, quote, "had intentionally been holding his breath in an attempt to beat the machine," end quote. In the nearly 50 years since his strange disappearance and reappearance, Travis Walton has taken several polygraph tests, with mixed results. In 1978, he published Fire in the Sky, The Walton Experience, which detailed his abduction. In 1993, the book was adapted to the big screen with the same title. That same year, Travis Walton and Mike Rogers were interviewed on Larry King Live. On July 31, 2008, Travis appeared on The Moment of Truth, a game show, during which he was asked, quote, "Were you abducted by a UFO on November 5, 1975? He answered, "Yes." His answer was shown to be false. But was it? And what did Travis Walton claim happened when he was abducted? Shortly after his reappearance, Travis underwent regression hypnosis with Dr. James A. Harder. 3 doctors and a psychiatrist attended the sessions as well. Under hypnosis, Travis relayed a terrifying experience. He recalled blacking out after being hit by the beam of light. In fact, he believed he was killed by the beam of light, and then subsequently abducted so that he could be revived. All of this happened just before his co-workers drove off in a panic. After coming to, Travis opened his eyes to see, quote, 3 humanoid creatures standing over him, end quote. These creatures were described as having large heads and oversized eyes. One article stated, quote, "Travis described the creatures as being between 4 to 5 feet tall, with pale skin and enlarged heads. They had large brown eyes and were wearing orange jumpsuits," end quote. Travis recalled being bound to a table, with a strange device pinning him in place. Realizing he was being held hostage, Travis tried to grab something to defend himself with. The creatures left the room, and Travis was able to free himself from the table. Once freed, he walked around the spacecraft, where he was approached by, quote, human-looking beings in blue jumpsuits, end quote. He reported being moved to another spacecraft, during which he was fitted with a face mask-type device, which caused him to black out. When he awoke at the gas station 5 days later, Travis assumed he'd been gone for no more than a few hours. He was dismayed to learn it had been 5 days. One article stated, quote, his clothes were on backward. He states that he remembers seeing the craft close its doors and float into the distance. He wandered to a phone booth roughly 30 miles southwest of where he was taken. He claims the town was strangely completely empty. He placed a call to his brother-in-law on the payphone and is back home within an hour, end quote. Was Travis Walton telling the truth? As you can imagine, there were lots of skeptics, and seemingly just as many theories and explanations for his disappearance. Earlier I mentioned an interview conducted with Dwayne Walton and Mike Rogers. The lengthy interview, nearly 65 minutes long, with a UFO interest group, included a few interesting details about the logging contract Travis and his crew were working on. Crew Chief Mike Rogers is recorded as saying, quote, this contract we have is seriously behind schedule. In fact, Monday the time is up. We haven't done any work on it since Wednesday because of this thing, and therefore it won't be done. I hope they take that into account, end quote. The timing is noteworthy. If you remember, at the start I mentioned the crew had gotten an extension to complete the work by November 10th. Travis disappeared on November 5th and was gone for 5 days. He reappeared on November 10th, the date of the deadline. Something interesting. Forestry Service contracts include an Act of God clause, which, quote, excused contractors who were delinquent due to unforeseeable circumstances, end quote. Other skeptics take a more cynical, less functional approach. Some say the story was a hoax for the sake of financial gain. Some point to the discrepancies in the stories of Travis and his co-workers. Believers in Travis's story point to those discrepancies, not as lies, but as the spotty memory of traumatized men. Skeptics also point out the polygraph results. Travis failed as many as he passed, including the infamous Moment of Truth test in 2008. Something interesting. Polygraph tests are notoriously unreliable. According to the American Psychological Association, quote, the accuracy of polygraph testing has long been controversial. An underlying problem is theoretical. There is no evidence that any pattern of physiological reactions is unique to deception. An honest person may be nervous when answering truthfully, and a dishonest person may be non-anxious. Also, there are few good studies that validate the ability of polygraph procedures to detect deception, end quote. Shortly after Travis Walton reappeared at the gas station, he was examined by Dr. Lester Stewart, who observed his erratic behavior and likened it to, quote, drug addicts he'd treated, end quote. A small bruise was visible on the inside of Travis's right elbow, which might have indicated intravenous drug use. Others have claimed the men were hallucinating, and that the UFO and supposed alien abduction were a form of mass hysteria. Something interesting. There were no drugs found in Travis Walton's system during his medical examination after his reappearance. The bruise and behavior is unexplainable to this day. Perhaps the most outspoken skeptic of Travis Walton's story was journalist and UFO researcher Philip J. Klass. He spent years researching Travis's abduction story with the goal of debunking it. In 1983, he published a book, UFOs, The Public Deceived, and claimed to have proof that Travis Walton made up his abduction story. He highlighted the Walton family's obsession with UFOs and how one of them wanted to be abducted by aliens. One article stated, quote, "In fact, Travis would later admit to watching a made-for-TV movie about another UFO kidnapping less than 3 weeks before he himself disappeared. Furthermore, many observers were puzzled that no one in Walton's family seemed particularly upset that he'd vanished, even when Walton's older brother Dwayne assured everyone his younger sibling was simply lost in space." End quote. Philip Klass came to this conclusion, quote, "If the incident was not a hoax, then the UFO had behaved as if it were following a script prepared by Mike Rogers and Travis Walton. There seemed to be too long a string of remarkable coincidences for the UFO abduction to be true." End quote. I think there are stories we simply want to be true. Maybe because it connects us to the person and the incident. Maybe because it points us to something larger than us. Or maybe because no matter how fantastical these stories are, the slight possibility it could be true is exciting. I'll admit, I feel like the jury is still out on the Travis Walton abduction story. Both sides have compelling reasons and unanswered questions for believing what they do. For me, though, it comes down to a singular question. Is it possible that Travis Walton was abducted by aliens and taken among the stars for 5 days? I've always said things like this are possible, and I'll plant my flag there right now. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. Where was Travis Walton for those 5 days in November 1975? Was he abducted by aliens as he claimed? Or did his disappearance have a more rational explanation? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.